Hi, Paweł. Nice to meet you and nice to see you on the call. I'm Matt, Head of Business at Scalac, and I have today on a call Paweł Gieniec from CloudAdmin. Could you tell us more about your company?
Sure. So my name is Paweł Gieniec. I'm the CEO and founder of CloudAdmin.io, and we are helping companies eliminate waste in the cloud. So right now, you can sign up for a trial. It takes less than 15 minutes, and we start giving you actionable insights on ways that you can eliminate waste, and you can save money in AWS and Azure. So that's what we're doing today. It's pure SaaS platform, really easy to integrate, and super quick, lightweight.
Yeah, I think you have this pitch like I can wake you up at 2 o'clock in the night and it's like
yeah. I've been doing it for a while, as you can tell.
It's really well shaped. Yeah, so you are working with Scalac, so our company. So I'm very curious about how you actually got to know about our company. You know, how it happened.
Yeah. I think also it's interesting because I thought we only were working together for about a year and a half, but it turns out that it's almost 2.5 years. So time really flies. So the story of how I actually met your CEO is really interesting. One day I found out that the foreign minister of Poland signed an agreement with the foreign minister, or the Secretary of State in the US. So it's the foreign minister at the time was Radosław Sikorski, and the Secretary of State was John Kerry. They signed some kind of agreement that basically was to present, technology companies in Poland. They were to tour the West Coast, in LA and the Bay Area. And so I reached out to the consulate in LA, and they signed me up for this thing, and it was here in San Francisco one of the days. And so I ended up showing up and meeting a bunch of entrepreneurs from Poland, and your CEO was one of them. Actually, I think he has a photo. He took a photo of the room, and I was like right in the middle. It was really funny. It was completely, we didn't plan it, but it's a small world, and we crossed paths. And I remember at that time, he was building some kind of game where also it integrated with the Android watch or something like that. Yeah, you're kind of nodding your head. I don't remember the details because it was quite 4 years ago. Yeah, 4.5 years ago. And then we started talking, and he seemed like a really interesting guy. And every time he would come out for a trip, because I know you guys have clients out here in the Bay Area and in other parts of the US, every time he'd come out for a trip, we'd just grab a beer and casually have a conversation. And then, when I was starting this company, it kind of made sense to further along that engagement and just, explore it, what we could do together. And it's been 2.5 years of good times. So
it's really crazy because these missions that we are having from time to time are from Poland, sponsored by the government. They are not perceived like very fruitful. So actually, you are a contradiction to it, because it was really fruitful mission that he was participating.
There you go.
So you started CloudAdmin, but actually earlier you were doing some other businesses. Could you just tell more about that? Because your journey, you have, I can say you have Polish name, so sounds like you are from Poland, but
So I was born in Kraków. I grew up there for about 5 years, and then my folks ended up emigrating to Canada, and I grew up around Toronto for the remainder next 19 years. Went to school there, right? Went to college there, educated myself, and then 10 years ago, actually, I moved out to San Francisco. Right, this is the mecca for startups, right? For technology. And so, I basically moved out to San Francisco, not knowing anybody. Got a job offer, and kind of started working at Zynga at the beginning of 2010, which was a really interesting time, because Zynga was the fastest company to hit $1 billion in revenue in American history back in 2010, 2011. So it was a rocket ship. There was people sleeping under the desks, coding. Every social game that we launched at the time just received millions and millions of users. I think there was one, I think it was Cityville, where we launched Cityville, and within 1 month we went from a few thousand people playing it to 100 million people within 30 days. So that's what I mean by rocket ship. it was really interesting too, because Zynga was the fastest, or the first company to prove out that you could build a successful business on top of the public cloud. So they were 80% of AWS back in 2010, 2011, to the point of Amazon actually butting heads with Zynga and refusing to sell them any more servers, because we essentially tapped Amazon out, which is a really, again, interesting foresight, because we were the really like the first ones to say, hey, you can build a huge successful company on top of cloud. You can scale it, right? You can go from playing a game playing a few thousand users to 100 million in the span of 30 days, right? All on AWS infrastructure. Yeah, so I did a few different things in Amazon, actually. I built a notifications channel with another engineer, and that worked for about 400 million people a month. So really highly scalable stuff. Notifications in the sense, if you're playing one of the social games at Zynga, Farmville, and you wanna, you need some chickens, eggs, screws, anything to advance in the quest, you're gonna spam all your friends and kind of utilize the infrastructure that we built to increase retention and increase virality of the game. So it's a lot of fun. Did that for about a year and a half at Zynga, after which point I got a little bit bored. And Zynga had made an acquisition out of Texas, out of McKinney, Texas, of a company called Newtoy, which was Words with Friends and the other With Friends franchises. So I jumped ship, wanted to really touch mobile. We grew from about 3 million people playing in the entire With Friends ecosystem to about 21 million in the span of 11 months, all organically. We were steadily growing from 3 to 5 million in the span of 10 months. And in December of 2011, Alec Baldwin, the actor, got kicked off a flight for playing Words with Friends. And I think Zynga got like $50 or $60 million worth of free press coverage, which is just, the right time, the right product. And a week later from that, in 2011, I think it was the largest sale of smartphones for Christmas. So it's just like, everybody remembered it. It was still funny. We were still getting press coverage. So we doubled overnight again. So we went, 3 to 5, 5 to 10, and 10 to 20. That acceleration happened in about 2 weeks, right? Which is crazy. Anyways, after that, Zynga made an acquisition out of a company in New York called OMG Pop for about $180 million, and that was the Draw Something franchise. They launched a second iteration of their game, and unfortunately, it just didn't perform to the executives' expectations, so they ended up shutting down the entire New York office, and I took it over as the game studio CTO. So it was kind of a really interesting situation, because I was essentially replacing 6 people full time, and there was no way that that's setting you up for success. But the challenge was really interesting, right? Because we had 2 live franchises, Draw Something 1 and Draw Something 2, that had to be run 365 days, 24/7. So it's just like, hey, let's try it, right? Nobody expects me to pull this off. So if I fail, right? It's like, well, how do you expect one person to do 6 people's job? But I managed to pull it off and hold it together. And that was when we're sitting with the executive team looking at the P&L statement for that business division for the very first time. And I realized that we were spending about $2.5 million on our just server infrastructure. And I realized that the cost should be moving with what the game is actually doing. So if the game is growing, the cost should be growing. If the game is steady state, the cost should be steady. If the games are declining, then the cost should be declining, right? But the costs were staying the same, the games were declining. So there was some obviously a miscommunication, but there's a lot of smart people in the room looking at a number in an Excel cell, right? And you just don't have any context for that number, what it should be, whether 2.5 million is the right answer or not. And I was able to reduce that to about $1 million in the span of about 3 weeks, right? And I realized, 1, it's a challenging problem, and 2, it's arbitrary, right? We could have gone from 2.5 to 2 million, and then we would have been like, hey, that's job done, right? It's good enough. And so that was the whole thesis behind this interesting, like, wow, this is a really challenging problem. And that was 7 years ago, right? So the world has gotten significantly more complicated since then. Just the public cloud has grown dramatically since then, right? The amount of options that you have has grown dramatically. It's no longer a problem that you can really solve on a sheet of paper or with an Excel spreadsheet. It's a problem where you really need software to be able to solve it for you, right? Anyway, so 4 months after that, I left Zynga and I jumped ship into a small startup where I was the very first employee, actually before they even received their first check, of a company called Lux, which we were doing on-demand valet parking. And that was a very interesting thing, because what I realized is at Zynga, right, when I joined, I think it was probably within employee 500 to 600 range. And there was a lot of problems that were solved, right? Simple example was, hey, we have money wired now. How do we do payroll? How do we get that going? How do we do benefits? How do we build, an idea from a concept on a sheet of paper, right, into actually building it into a mobile application, into technology? So I built that entire technical foundation, and that was a lot of fun. Was there for 3.5 years. We employed 1,000 people across 8 cities in the United States. We raised $75 million, sold it to Volvo. But toward the end of my tenure at Lux, right, I'm kind of solving the same problem, but it's 3.5 years later to what I was originally solving at Zynga. And I just thought to myself, look, there's an opportunity here, right? I thought a lot of the products on the market weren't that great. And so that was one of the reasons that I founded CloudAdmin. And yeah, it's been a really interesting ride, because I really had a lot of ideas to how the market was going to move, to how public cloud was going to dominate. And today, public cloud represents 3% of all IT spend after 14 years. So it's tiny. 97% of it is actually all on-premise data centers, private cloud, and even in December of last year, right, 4 months ago, Andy Jassy, who's the CEO of AWS, announced officially that AWS was getting into the data center market with AWS Outposts. So, there's entire situations and reasons why people can't leverage the public cloud, right? And they will ship you servers to install into your data centers for you to leverage AWS services. So it's kind of a really exciting time to see what's going to happen within this decade, right? And now with these internet exchanges are hitting record levels of traffic, right? And so the question is like, that's accelerating people's adoption of either moving out into companies that are dedicated to managing data centers or into the public cloud, right? Because they realized, hey, if we have on-premise data centers, we can't buy masks right now, right? That's incredibly, like, hospitals are having problems buying masks. We can't buy the right chemicals to disinfect our data center if somebody gets sick, right? And then the third problem is the data centers weren't really designed to handle a global pandemic like this, right? When people were building data centers, they thought, oh, there's a flood, there's an earthquake, right? There's a tornado, right? So we should geographically, move our stuff around and have redundancy there, not in the same regions. But a global pandemic that wasn't something that have enterprise data centers, they want to get rid of that, right? Because they just realize that it's not a cost-effective way to manage it, and they can do it cheaper by shipping and going somewhere else. So CloudAdmin has actually partnered with quite a few data center companies to take our software and distribute it to all their customers. So that's right now it's a large untapped market, and it's now given global events, it's accelerating, and people want more, and they want to accelerate that migration timeline significantly, right? What was probably going to happen in the next 2 years might happen in the next 6 to 9 months, and instead of, let's say, on-premise traditional IT, it was supposed to drop from something like 39% to 16%. It might drop to 5% or 4%, right? Because it's just going to get accelerated. So it's been a wild ride the last 10 years, right? And it's not stopping. There's always a really interesting set of challenges and interesting ways to going into a problem, disprove yourself, and really realize how there's an opportunity that you haven't seen before. So.
And CloudAdmin at all, how long it exists on the market? It's 3 years or 4?
No, it's been about 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's about 2 years that we've been actively selling the product. But the partnership agreements with the data centers are probably about 4 months old. So it's relatively new. I think that last year was really when the mentality changed and people started to realize, hey, if I have 5,000 customers, right? There's 2 ways that I can offer them cost optimization, right? I can hire a team of people and throw a team of people at 5,000 companies, in which case, good luck, right? That's a really difficult thing to scale. And the other way is, hey, we can utilize software. And so with a software that allows them to actually help their customers manage their public cloud spend. What was really interesting was kind of the way that we convinced the first data center to partner with us, right? And these guys hired ex AWS employees, so they had people really familiar with Amazon, people that had worked there for multiple years. And we said, look, just give us one account and we'll onboard that account and prove to you that the software works, right? And I said, okay, cool. So we did a trial and our software pulled out 40% savings in addition to what they were doing with people, right? And they were shocked, right? They're like, okay, we want this, right? And that started that entire first partnership. What's really exciting about that is that, it's impossible to do this job consistently with human beings if you have 5,000 customers. Yeah. Right? It's just extremely difficult to do it consistently. And so the software does it consistently, treats everybody the same, and never gets tired and just constantly working in the background, right? So it's kind of at that point, it was kind of a no-brainer.
Now when the whole pandemic is out, actually people can't walk into the data center and make a nice pitch. So you have even more advantage on that. Looking from the perspective, of course, pandemic is something good, but from the perspective of the business model of the software, this gives you an advantage.
For sure.
And shows also these vulnerabilities with using people to optimize the server costs. So yeah, and now you are your own founder. You founded the company, right? So you are responsible for everything. And how you have built it, I mean, do you have an office? Do you have a huge team that like?
Yeah. So with that's it's really interesting, right? Because when I worked at Zynga, we were able to do an incredible amount, right? With a small amount of people, right? So when Zynga IPO, they had over $1 billion in the bank, right? In profit. So it just showed you how profitable software, pure software can be. At Lux, we were in the business of logistics, right? And that's an entire different beast because now if we wanted to double the size of the valets that we had, that would probably take us 6 months, right? And there was a lot of things out there that were a function of time rather than something that we could control. So if you wanted to do a background check, right, that might take 2 weeks, that might take 4 weeks, right? Depending on how extensive of a background check you wanted. If you wanted to train people, that took time, right? Getting uniforms, all that stuff up and running is just things you need to touch. And so there's only so many people you can train in a room, right? There's only so many valets that will trickle in every single day, right? And so with CloudAdmin, what we've been able to do is we've been able to be really, really lean and get a huge amount of advantage with regards to our data center partners, with regards to customers. So our company right now is 4 people. We all work remotely. 2 of those are from you guys. And I'm in San Francisco, and my EVP of sales is in San Diego. So we're all remote. So I think that's becoming also the norm and the standard. And what's happening right now is I think accelerating that mindset. Even social happy hours are now happening digitally, right? There's no longer can you go into a bar. But we've been able to get quite a lot of traction with a very small, nimble team. And I mean, one of the reasons is when you have people that have done this over and over and over, they know what mistakes not to make, right? It's not to say that we don't make mistakes, but we see how we can potentially, build technology that I've done in the past, just reuse a lot of that learning and a lot of that experience and skill set, and do it here, right? And if kind of how to ship software, if you ship software that's scaled to large people, you kind of know the best practices of things to put into place. With regards to sales, right? If we partner with a larger company and we give them revenue that would be coming to us, we do some kind of rev share, we can tap into their sales team, incentivize their sales team, and it costs us nothing, right? Instead of us getting paid, we might just get paid, some percentage less, right? and we don't have to hire a large sales team. So it's been, we've tried to do that as intelligently as possible. Also, I don't feel like right now we raising a lot of capital here's the interesting, raising a lot of capital puts this pressure on you, right? Because if somebody gives you a huge amount of capital, they want you to spend more because they want you to invest that money to grow the business, right? Because that's some capital that they could have given to somebody else. So I think setting yourself up to be profitable, especially in a time like this, just allows you to be at an advantage when you're going and raising capital, right? And if somebody says, well, how large is your team? When you say, 4 people, they're shocked, right? Given what we've been able to accomplish with such a small amount of teams. So it really gives us an advantage, especially in this current market dynamic, to go out and raise capital if that's something that we need to do.
Yeah, and so you don't have office, you work remotely, you have
Yep.
people, and you are building a company that actually delivers really serious solution for kind of big players, because data centers is not kind of a tiny company. Usually
Yeah.
it is a lot of investment in hardware, a lot of investment in people.
Buildings. Yep.
These are
Physical
serious companies, tangible, and so it's really incredible to see that happening. What I'm always curious about is that, do you follow some kind of guidebooks on how to set up a company? Like, for instance, you have 37 Signals that is now focused on one software, and you use this as a knowledge source, or you just took it from your self learning?
Yeah. I think a lot of it, like a lot of it is dependent upon your experience. So I've gone through this before, so I knew what I was getting myself into. And I think also throughout the last, let's say, 5 years, there's a lot of things that have happened in the ecosystem that make it easier and easier to start a company, right? So for example, with payroll, you have companies like Gusto and Zenefits. You can just plug in, it's extremely easy, and you can everything get it up and running, right? You have a lot of banks that support startups here, and that people know about startups. So it's just there's a really good foundation to kind of do that, especially here in San Francisco. And yeah, I mean, there's great resources online as well. But primarily what I've been doing is just basing it on my experience, and then you go and talk to other founders, right? That's probably one of the more interesting and untapped potential is you go and talk to another founder, and the experience that you get there just really over time, I think, changes you. And I'll give you one example. So when I was at Lux, I was a very early employee, but there was one person at Lux that was dealing with the investors, and that was the CEO, right? And even though I was really close, there was the company was very flat. Dealing with wire transfers, interacting with investors is such a small thing, but over time it changes you. Over time, that experience does change who you are and how you think about things, right? And being thrown into situations where maybe the CEO has to make a decision, and again, nothing huge, but maybe, oh, hey, can we talk to you for a second? Can we just jump in this meeting? Over time, over years, changes you, right? Because that's a really unique set of experience that happens to you over and over and over, and not a lot of people get that, right? So I think that's also been a learning curve by itself, and that's something that's difficult to just read from a blog sometimes, right? Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, I think this is a really curious angle to look at it. People don't really think how they learn and what stays in them, because interactions with investors, for instance, changes the way you think about building companies, and changes the way how you actually think about growing your team, everything. So
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, you can talk to other people that have done fundraising. You can talk to other people, you can talk to investors, because they go out and they fundraise from their LPs, right, to have money in their investment firms for their rounds. And it's still, I feel like, a very, very unique experience that even though you can talk to people that have done it, you read about it, going in and doing it yourself is just very different. That's how it felt to me, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I had such kind of endeavor. Before I joined Scalac, I had the startup co-founded with someone from Netherlands. He was the CEO and raised capital for a seed round. It was really hard to co-found company in
Yeah.
remote. So actually, I'm always very um, admiring companies that are having this really strong and sharp focus on what is important, and take out all the rest of the bullshit that is happening. Like, I need an office because I need to look at the people how they work. That's
Right. 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 Right.
that's kind of the problem I'm sometimes facing with prospects, that they okay, you're a remote company, so how I can be sure that you are working on my project. It's
Right.
actually, it's a question to you. How do it's 9 hours difference with Poland, right? So
Yep.
some companies, it's like, man, it's crazy. I don't have any overlap with them. I finish my job and they just woke up, and I can't monitor what they're doing. So
Right. Right.
I'm paying
So
for something.
yeah, yeah. That's a really interesting point, right? Because even I think right now with the daylight savings is actually a 10-hour difference for about 3 weeks, then it shrinks to 9 again.
Yeah.
Um, but what I've tried to do as much as possible is be there when everybody wakes up and everybody starts working for the first hour, make sure they have everything, and then when they finish working, be there to make sure that if they have any questions or any concerns, they can drop that off, and I can think about it throughout the day and have the solutions and answers in place when they start working again, right? So it is kind of like almost this regiment, right? Where I go to sleep at probably 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I wake up at about 8:30 when they're wrapping up, and so I can get that tail end as well as the beginning end. And with regards to how do I know that people are working, right? Well, I think with engineers it's a little bit easier than maybe somebody that is picking up the phone and making phone calls, right? And that's with regards to I just every day they show me what they're doing, or they're going to have questions, right? Or it's very easy to see how much code they've actually changed. So it becomes very obvious if people are working or if people aren't working, just based on the amount of code that they're checking in and changing, right? And actually the amount of progress that they're making a day. So from that perspective, it's pretty simple. With engineering, I think it's a little bit more abstract with if you have a sales force, right? Whether people are working or not. But I think over time you can figure that out really easily, because if you're not getting sales, if people aren't making phone calls, right? If there's no meetings happening, then obviously there's some kind of problem. So it's not actually that complicated given today's dynamic. And I mean, you can always hop on a Zoom call like we're doing right now and interact with people and get a sense of what's going on, right? So being in the office, I think there's definitely some advantage, but I think being remote, there's also another advantage, which is just you can kind of don't have to commute, right? You can save time there. If you grab lunch in your kitchen, right, then it's really easy. You're saving time and you're just working from the comfort of your own home. So I think in some ways you're saving a lot of time versus having to commute to an office.
Yeah, yeah. And the situation that you are living, people working whole day long, doesn't make you anxious, like oh no, what happens when they are stuck in some kind of a task and they can't do much. It doesn't give you discomfort.
Yeah, it doesn't give me discomfort, but I also, the way I protect myself against that is that there's multiple things happening all at the same time. So if they get stuck on one task, they can do something else.
Yeah.
So it's never that we're like there's only one thing to do and that's it. There's also other things, right? But in general, I feel like I spend a lot of time just being there in the morning, or my evening, your morning, to make sure that they understand what's happening. I try to write pretty detailed product review documents, right, where I'm explaining what the problem is. And a lot of times I think when you explain at a high level, not technical level, what the problem is, right, what are we trying to achieve and why, I think that really helps give them context on what they're actually building.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot fewer issues with regards to them getting stuck in a task, because even if they can't figure out one particular problem, they that's one piece in the entire puzzle, so they can do they can work on other pieces, right? And if we need to talk about one specific thing, then we can do that, and we can keep progressing forward. So I wouldn't say it's never happened that somebody's been unproductive, but that it's not necessarily that they didn't know what to do. It could be that I didn't explain something properly as well, right? So it's kind of a two-way street for that communication. But I, in general, have been very, very happy with regards to the communication and the quality of the work that's been happening remotely. So it's not a big concern for me.
Thanks. And many companies I'm talking with, startups especially, they are concerned about, okay, I'm making my company with an external company. So actually they can, it's a risk. I can't pitch that to investors because the investors, show me your team, and these guys are not actually from your team because they are working.
Yeah. Actually, I found the exact opposite in my experience.
Okay.
I think that mentality has significantly changed, and I think that one of the things that probably significantly made an impact is blockchain, right? So with teams that are building any kind of technology on top of blockchain, they're just naturally distributed, and I think that mentality of, hey, you need to have an office or like multiple offices, right, where people can come in and talk, is no longer there. When I tell people that my engineering team is in Poland, actually a lot of people find that a net benefit because they start to understand that we're being capital efficient, right? Hiring in the Bay Area is incredibly expensive, right? And I wouldn't say that the talent is any better. It's just that there is just slightly different mentality, right? And I think that the talent that I've worked with you guys for over 2 years, right? So I know the quality of the talent that I've gotten, and I've been incredibly pleased with it. And for when I talk to investors, that's never been an issue of like, oh, they're remote, so we don't like that, right? Nobody's ever told me in a meeting that they see that as a disadvantage. They've actually said like, oh, we're seeing more and more, right? And especially you hiring people from where you originally are from. So if you're an Indian founder, they say they hire folks from India. If you're a founder from France, and people hire engineers from France. If you're originally have roots from Poland, I've hired people in Poland, right? Working with you guys. So that's they're telling me that. So I think the mentality of the market is definitely shifting.
Okay. And do you feel such kind of problem with okay, we charge you per hour, right? So people can, I finished my 8 hours and I am done, and there is a huge problem and no one is dealing with that. No one is sleeping under the desk because you have a problem. Do you have such kind of experience that,
Yeah. No, I would say that in general, we have a lot of infrastructure in place to monitor what we're doing. So if there are problems, I don't want somebody to deploy at the end of the day and then go home, right? Or deploy on a Friday, right? And then go home for the weekend. So we generally try to mitigate that by deploying in the early morning, your time, and early evening, my time. So when things are starting, because then there's somebody there in case something goes wrong. So it's never happened that something's gone wrong outside of the hours, that we allocate for deployment, right? Yeah.
I get it.
And always, like, even if something does go wrong, it's really important to have a rollback strategy, right? So one strategy is, how do we build something? How do we move it forward? But then let's say, there's unforeseeable issues or unforeseeable problems. What's the rollback procedure, right? And having that always instituted, I think, is extremely important because nobody's there. Cool, I can just redeploy and I can roll everything back, right?
I get it. So your software is not in such crucial place that you would need to have people working, in the night or in your day to cover some serious critical issues, because it's recovering and self-healing. So
yes,
it's a blessing that you have. Some companies.
Yeah, we also have a huge amount of unit tests. We invested in an incredible amount of testing, where we have I think a suite of over 1,000 unit tests, and then we also have QA. So we're pretty confident when we deploy. Yeah,
I get it. And what about the mindset? Do you think that a startup mindset is important in such kind of setup, that you have your company and there is some external company still, because although we work together for several years, it's still an external company. Do you think
Yeah.
like a startup mindset is something that is crucial, or
Actually, I think the startup mindset, there's a lot of, people that hire friends of friends or something to help them out with one task, or help them build some MVP. So I don't think that that's any different, whether you utilize an external company or whether you utilize some friend network that you have over here to get somebody to build you something, right? So I think overall that's pretty standard in the startup world. I think it's more rare to have constant requirements for technology to constantly be building features over and over, as a startup. But if you're the technology behind the technology, then there's always in a really large market, then there's always stuff that you can build and features that you can be onboarding that your customers are telling you about, right? That's kind of the situation that we're in. I don't think that's a disadvantage or something that is a startup mindset or non-startup mindset, right? I think even at larger companies, right, you have entire projects that I'm sure you guys are working with that are entirely encapsulated, right? And so I think either way, you have the ability to kind of offload that to somebody else, whether it's an external company or whether it's a friend of a friend here.
I get it. When I talk with startups, they tend to have such kind of need. When they approach us, they say, okay, I need a person who actually is a copy of me, a copy of CTO. And
Yeah.
this is some kind of I always have trouble with such clients, because they are actually trying to join three people in one person,
Right.
with a startup mindset still in place, so that they
Right.
work in such way like they would work for their own business.
Right.
I'm not sure whether you met such kind of challenges, but I feel that you are kind of, when I look from on that perspective, I think your approach is really mature. So
Well, yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're saying, look, I think one of the things that I realized, right, is that when you start a company, there are, a lot of people start companies, right? And a lot of people fail companies. And there's definitely an element of, are you cut from the founder cloth?
Yeah.
Right? So can you just keep solving problems and keep grinding away at a problem? Are you able to, identify the holes in the market and go after those, right? And the responsibility, like, look, I'm the CEO and CTO, right? Which is kind of unique, but at the end of the day, every problem in the company is my responsibility, right? I'm at the end of the day responsible for taking action based on the employee's actions, right? Whether I like it or not. And you have to, I think it's impossible to expect that of every single employee, right? Because there's founders and then there's employees, and the mentality is not going to be the same, right? My company and I'm working for somebody else, right? I think that having somebody come to you and say, oh, I want a clone of these three people is tough, right? Because even here, right, even if you have a company, whether it's a founder or not a founder, and somebody's been there for 4 years and they quit, and you need to replace that person, right? You're never going to be able to clone and replace that exact same person who has 4 years of knowledge, right, that in their head of how your company functions. So that's an important thing to realize. I think that the expectations there are extremely important to set properly. Because if your expectation is like, oh, I'm just going to hire 5 people like me, right, that are going to think like me, do like me, act like me, that's not possible, right? And actually, I would argue that you don't want that, because you want people that complement your skill set. So something that I'm weak at, I want to hire somebody for that who's really good at, right? So, and you always want to complement that skill set.
I agree. It's that's why I said that I think from that perspective, your approach is really mature, because you don't look into our collaboration in such way. I'm looking for a unicorn who is just doing what I'm doing. I'm aware that I'm delegating some work to
Right.
specific skill set, to specific people who are skilled in certain area. and over demanding on one person that he can do everything. It's really challenging, and I see that startups tend to fall in that kind of trap, that they are looking for a wonder man who usually it looks to me like they had a co-founder or some kind of employee who was almost like working hard like founders. he dropped because he felt like he's overburdening himself, and they are just trying to find someone else in an external company that can do the same.
No, I totally understand that. I totally understand. One of the interesting things I feel like that I really enjoy doing is taking so with an employee that I have through Scala, right? Ronaldo.
Yeah.
He started out as a front end engineer.
Yeah.
Right. And I realized, based on his education, just based on his background, I figured that he would be capable of doing much more than he was doing, right? And so he was doing front end, and I said, look, are you interested in doing back end? And I probably got like a lukewarm response. Oh yeah, maybe, like, And I'm like, look, even if you do back end for a month, it's going to make you a much better front end engineer, because you're going to have an idea of how that entire world functions. So even if you do it for a month and you tell me, hey, I don't like this, this isn't what I want to do, I want to only stay front end, you're still going to be a much better front end engineer in your career going forward, right?
Yeah.
Because you have much more visibility into what's happening end to end. And I felt that, this was a person who had all the skill sets, like fundamentally, and they were capable of solving just technology problems, that if I threw them into the back end and they were only doing front end, with some hand holding and some explanations, they would be able to thrive, right? And I think that's probably about a year and a half ago that happened, or even longer. And he's been doing back end development, right? And now he can do both. He can do front end and back end, right? So actually, I think one of the things that he enjoys the most is doing a feature where he needs to do stuff on the front end and he needs to do stuff on the back end. And he's worked with different technology. Like, again, it's not a problem of siloing somebody, but growing them also as a person. I think that is probably one of the core values that, as a leader, and especially in a startup, that you can give to somebody, right? Is hey, look at all the different steps that you're touching, right? If me and you worked as an engineer at a larger company, right, where there's thousands and thousands of employees, we probably will be responsible for one step, right? And let's say building something, breaking down the requirements, or figuring out what you're going to build, breaking it down into requirements, actually building it, QAing it, and shipping it, right? There's 5 steps, right? In a large company, you're going to be responsible for one of those steps, and you might know about another step, right? So if you're the engineer building it, you might then interact with the QA that actually tests it, right? And so the interesting thing there is that when you come and work in a startup, right, you're very siloed to doing one particular thing. And in a startup, it's kind of the advantage is that you gain that entire slew of experience, right? You get to see all those 5 steps. You get to participate in all those 5 steps. And so I think, right, one of my favorite interview questions is, why do you want to work here? And actually trying to convince the person that they don't want to work at my company, right? Which catches a lot of people off guard, because a lot of people go into interviews and they're like, oh, please come work here, right? And I'm like, you don't want to go work here, right? And go get a job at a much larger company. They're going to pay you way more money, right? CloudAdmin doesn't have, $40 billion in the bank yet, right? There's large companies that have that, and they'll give you free lunch, they'll give you much better health benefits, right? You'll work less, they'll pay you more, and yeah, that sounds great, right? Why don't you go do that? And so really, I feel like for me, working with Scala, I've been able to identify people that want to see those 5 steps, right? They'll want to grow as engineers. They'll want to learn new technologies, that aren't afraid of being thrown into a problem that they need to figure out. And so when you asked about a while ago about, am I afraid that somebody's going to get stuck in a task, I've tried to just grow people with that mentality. So that's why I'm not afraid of it, right? And I think that if people don't have that mentality, then they haven't done that, right? They've been very hands off, and they want to hire somebody, and they just think of that person more of a cog in a wheel, rather than taking that human being and developing them into something where if they decide to leave, the value of having worked with you is something that they're going to take for the rest of their career, right? So that's the way that I think about developing people, is to actually teach them additional skill sets that they weren't able to learn somewhere else, and grow them, right? And we had that really kind of same mentality at Lux, right? Where we would hire people that maybe didn't have the best resumes, or they had like a fundamental background of having some kind of core, computer science education or whatever, but they never traditionally worked as a software engineer, right? And those people ended up being some of the best employees that we hired, right? Because they really value that experience, and they went after it a lot more, right?
Thanks. Yeah, it's really great to hear that. It's I think again, it's pretty rare approach. People tend to approach us more like a, join our company for a while so we can speed up our development, and then go away because we need to get the things done. So yeah, you have really unique approach. I think it's really special. And actually, my last question was, and we are running out of time. I'm not sure whether you have still 5 minutes more or something.
Yeah, I got 5 minutes.
Thanks. So one last question I had, it's about culture. And actually what you were saying over the last minutes and earlier, because in remote companies, it's really hard to cultivate culture. At least that's how I feel, right? It's not such easy to just grab a beer with someone in the evening. Sure. and or meet at the lunch and talk and build that kind of relationship that is
easy to grab a beer now. Over a video conference, right? Which is what's happening. But no, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I see already a part of the answer, but I just wanted to ask you about culture. So whether is the culture important to you, or it's maybe something that it just go as a side effect of how you work with people? How you do you have some techniques to cultivate culture?
I think, I look, one of the things that I've been very adamant about in my career is what's the problem? Let's solve the problem, right? People get frustrated sometimes because they disagree on things. They might not understand the context. They might be really embedded, like fantastic, highly skilled engineers are very like, oh, we always treat Android as a second-class citizen. Why, right? Instead of like, hey, I can also learn iOS development, right? And maybe what I can do is I can be a much more better rounded person, right? There's all this opportunity for me to learn additional things rather than just focusing on that Android is going to be a second class citizen or blaming somebody for something, right? If somebody doesn't do something properly, you have to ask yourself why, right? What at the end of the day is the reason that this person didn't do it? Did they not have the right context? Did they not understand understand how to implement things, and keep cultivating that, right? And I think at the end of the day, you have people that might not want to work with you because they might want more of a structured environment, right? As a startup, things are much more fluid, right? It's not that I have a dedicated team running tasks every single day with great detail, and I'm just going to hand it off to you, and you're just going to be an individual contributor, and you're going to just write some software, and then that's it, right? We have a much more collaborative culture here. And I think that culture is really something, that mentality is something that I've tried to take and develop into a culture, right? So, okay, who cares, who did what? Let's figure out the solution, let's solve the problem, and let's figure out why it happened and make sure that didn't happen, right? And also then you're constantly educating people, you're constantly telling people, filling in the holes that they might have had, and that's why they had the problem, right? And for me, it's not about blame, it's not about going and yelling at somebody, it's about explaining it to somebody and cultivating that culture and teaching them and teaching them and teaching them. And I think that is extremely important because you grow, right? And so then people open up more to you, right? Because they realize that you're not going to go into a room and scream at them and yell at them, right? You're going to try to understand what happened, and at the end of the day, you're going to say, okay, cool, how do we solve this problem? Right? And that problem solving ability, I think, and mentality just makes people much more comfortable. So they feel much more at ease, right? That's something that I've seen work really, really well. If you are a person, you might be a really, really smart person, and you might just talk to the person and during a one-on-one, check in with them and tell them how things are going to go, right? But do you give them the right platform for them to tell you about what's happening, for them to tell you how they feel, right? I think that's an extremely important thing in any culture. And I think cultivating that, hey, let's solve the problem, let's not just yell at each other, is something that's worked really, really well for us. And I don't think that that's something that is unique to having an office and people that are located in one office versus remote work, right? I think that culture just thrives in either environment. So that's worked very, very well for us.
Great. Yeah, I do believe that this is the cornerstone of any successful company, I would say, because it's really hard to build your company on fear or on tyranny or any kind of a master-slave approach. It's really
right.
It's not that kind of era. We are not in an era that things are simple and you just tell people to go on a field and drop a seed and it works. It's much more complex world, and people have to think for themselves. Otherwise they will just keep stopping, and you can't make anything valuable with them. So it's, I think it's really great approach. Paweł, it's really it was really valuable talk, and I learned a lot again. So
great, yeah, it's always a pleasure.
I would love to have some follow-ups on this somewhere in the future. I don't want to take more of your time, of course, because we are all busy and you are just starting your day. So Paweł, once more, really great to listen to all of this. I wish you all great, all things good with your company, and keep safe with the pandemic.
Thank you. Yeah, you too.
So have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.